What's your favorite historical fact? Stalin was only about 5 feet 4 inches and wore high raised boots to make himself look taller. August von Mackensen, Imperial German Field Marshal, commander of the Death's Head Hussar Regiment, who the SS would later steal imagery from, was born in 1849. He therefore grew up watching telegraph and train systems grow up around him, and would be 9 when the first ironclad warship was commissioned in France, 1859. At that time several of Napoleon's famous marshals were still alive. He served in the Prussian and later German military, and would lead the invasions of Serbia and Romania in World War I. He died in November 1945, just before his 96th birthday, having grown up with muzzle loaders, wooden warships, horse carts, and trains only just being adopted. He ultimately witnessed the rise of telegraph, cinema, radio, powered flight, electricity for the home, recorded music and later film, the early theories of the atom, automobiles, submarines, airships, plastics, early computers, the jet plane, and the nuclear bomb. He witnessed 6 German regimes, saw both the rise and fall of Imperial Japan, being alive while it was still in isolation, and watched the US go from civil war to superpower. That's how much the world changed in a single documented lifetime, from the mid-industrial revolution to the end of World War II. The sheer rate of change boggles the mind. He also had a really cool hat. For 60 million years trees didn't decay. When they died they just fell over and laid there. For 60 million years trees existed before the enzyme that broke them down when they died. So tons of massive trees in the oxygen-rich environment just laid on the ground until they burned. That's how we have coal. Orville Wright of Wright brothers fame lived long enough to see an airplane fly faster than the speed of sound. Hitler overslept on D-Day and refused to send reinforcements because he believed it was a decoy. Another funny story about him. The Norwegian writer Knut Hamsun became a scumbag Nazi sympathizer in the 30s and 40s, which led to him having a meeting with Hitler. Since Hamsun's hearing was very poor, he kept asking Hitler to speak louder and louder, till Hitler was screaming in rage. Witnesses said they had never heard him so angry, and Hamsun was lucky to live. I think he was declared as a national disgrace. His books were good, too, but he was a despicable man. In 1726 there was a woman called Mary Toft who tricked doctors into believing that she gave birth to rabbits. Did she jam them up her pussy? Yes. Roosevelt was shot in the chest during a speech and just continued on like nothing happened. In World War II the Soviets tried to make anti-tank dogs, which were dogs strapped with bombs trained to run under tanks. The problem was that they trained on Soviet tanks that ran on gasoline when German tanks ran on diesel. So long story short, the first field test resulted in them running under their own tanks instead of the Germans, and thus ended that wild chapter of history. I see this often on unusual history threads, and I get why. It has a kind of slapstick quality to it, but every time it just makes me sad for the dogs. Calvin Coolidge, as president, played hide and seek with the Secret Service. Bin Laden used to do the same with the CIA. John Quincy Adams was a skinny dipper, and Calvin Coolidge often liked to be on a rocking horse during his presidency. Okay, but rocking horses are fun though. Sometime in around the beginning of the 1500s, Leonardo da Vinci and Niccolo Machiavelli conspired to try to steal the Arno River. They both lived in the city of Florence, and at the time there was hostilities with the city of Pisa, which was nearer to the mouth of the Arno River and controlled trade on it. Da Vinci came up with the plan to create a canal to divert the river so it no longer flowed to Pisa, which would allow Florence to dominate the whole region. Da Vinci drew up the plans and Machiavelli put them into action. However, Da Vinci didn't oversee the project, and instead the engineer who did decided to do it his own way, which would take longer and need more people. In the middle of the project, war broke out and the project had to be scrapped due to attacks from Pisa, so it never came to be. Still a great historical footnote though. When the Roman Empire ended in 1453, the pyramids at Giza were over 5,000 years old. The pyramids were thus more ancient to the Romans than the oldest Roman ruins are to us. The taunt "kiss my ass" was first recorded being used by a German mercenary lord named Gotz von Berlichingen and nicknamed Gotz of the Iron Hand. He lost a hand in battle and a blacksmith made him a high-tech fake iron hand. He shouted that taunt to his enemy when he was told the surrender of fort he was defending. Nobody truly knows who was the first person to reach the top of Mount Everest. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay were the first recorded people to reach the top, but many think climbers Mallory and Irvine reached the top before dying on the descent. Evidence pointing to this theory being correct is that Mallory always said how he would leave a picture of his family at the summit, and when his body was found in 1999 the picture was not in the pocket, but other papers like bills and otherwise unimportant notes were found. The last person to see them alive noted that they were determined to reach the top that day and he saw them pushing towards the summit. Mallory's body was found with a pickaxe wound to the head, suggesting that his tool had bounced off a rock when he tried to use it to stop himself from falling, killing him. It is very possible, and some consider likely, that JFK could have survived the assassination had he not been wearing a thick, girdle-like back brace that kept him stiffly upright when in public. Kennedy had terrible back problems since serving in World War II that were continually worsening. The back brace began as early as JFK met Stalin for the first time and wanted to appear tall and strong since it was at the height of the Cold War. However, his pain was so bad he often walked around the WH hunched over and looked decrepit. JFK continued to wear the brace to keep himself upright and portray the strong youthful image he crafted. When the first shot was fired, the brace made it nearly impossible to move, much less crouch down in the backseat to get out of the line of fire. He was then struck with the infamous shot to the back, throat, which rendered him more immobile, and finally the headshot that killed him. Parkland doctors testified to the Warren Commission how surprised they were at the size and tightness of the brace and how long it took to get off. One remarked it likely made him a sitting duck because of how immobile it would have rendered him. People used to take dead soldiers' teeth and make them into dentures. That George Washington was known as this really talented dancer, and was very in tune with the dances at the time of his being. I don't know why I just never would have thought this at all, but it's dope to hear that dancing, socializing was always a thing. Like from the passage I read, it seemed like whenever George was in attendance at the function, everyone knew he was gonna cut a rug and tear the house down. And the ladies considered themselves lucky to be his dance partner. When Andrew Jackson died, they had to remove his pet parrot from the funeral because it couldn't stop swearing. Abraham Lincoln once gave a speech which was so good that all of reporters forgot to take notes. Still to this day we don't know what exactly he said. William Shakespeare, one of the greatest writers, poets and playwrights of British history, could not spell his own name right consistently, spelling it at least 6 different ways in his lifetime. Betty White used to be called Betty Gray until she fought the Balrog and was reborn. President John Tyler, born in 1790, held office 1841 to 1845, has a living grandchild. There is actually no evidence that Vikings wore horned helmets. The Viking horn helmet myth makes no sense. Yes, let's apply 2 long appendages to our helmets that'll allow our heads to be easily grabbed and manipulated in battle. In all probability it was probably monks or Christian victims attempting to dehumanize the pagan Viking raiders. Benjamin Franklin had a pet squirrel. As a little girl, I dressed as him, with a squirrel beanie baby on my shoulder. My teacher had to look it up on the internet to check if I was right. She was amused. West Virginia exists because those Virginia counties were against secession from the United States and so they seceded from Virginia. I like to imagine that Virginia was all surprise Pikachu about it. I savor the irony when I see Confederate flags in WV. Do they know why West Virginia even exists? That on the 5th of May 1945, SS soldiers tried to take medieval castle turned POW Camp Carcelita in order to execute the French political prisoners inside. But defending it was an alliance of the French VIPs, American soldiers and German Wehrmacht. It was the only time Americans had ever fought inside of a castle and the only time during both World Wars that Americans and Germans fought side by side. Leonardo da Vinci's image of Jesus is said to have been based off the painter's boyfriend. A person born during the fall of the Byzantine Empire would have lived long enough to witness the discovery of the New World. 1453 to 1492, only 39 years between the two events. Christmas isn't a religious holiday, it was actually a Roman holiday dedicated to Saturn, where you would exchange gifts to each other. It was so popular that they had to change Christ's birthday to make it relevant. In 540, the Persian Emperor Khosrau sacked Antioch and deported the population to Mesopotamia, where he built a new city for them. What was it called? Better than Antioch, naturally. The fact that a moral idea for World War II was to drop giant condoms labeled small on the enemies to make them feel inferior. When King Henry VIII was still married to Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, his future fifth wife, was one of Cleves's ladies-in-waiting. They were close, even after Cleves's divorce. With all the tragedy and abuse from the men in her life, I'm just glad that she at least had one friend to trust.